Hi.
Yeah, that's perfect. There's no noise, so we're good. Guys, we're live. So, Uncle T, you can
Hello.
start the countdown.
Okay.
Everybody you meet is either in a crisis, coming out of crisis, or heading towards a crisis. Don't Quote Me on That is a book for crisis. Quotes have a magical way of capturing the essence of life's most valuable lessons. I have had many personal experiences, both good and bad, from which I was able to derive meaningful lessons only after reading relatable quotes and reflecting. In essence, the quotes illuminated my path at points of darkness. It is for this reason that I decided to narrow down timeless quotes that speak to various aspects of life and write personal reflections that can hopefully be of value to anyone who needs perspective to get them through difficult times. I was inspired to pen this collection by the following quote that continues to influence my mindset when the going gets tough. Socrates once said, "Remember that there is nothing stable in human affairs. Therefore, avoid undue elation in prosperity or undue depression in adversity."
Good evening, everyone. Hi. Hi, Chaba.
Hi, Anele. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening. Good evening to our guests. Welcome to the launch of Don't Quote Me on That. My name is Anel Nzovu, and I am honored to be the host and facilitator of this incredible discussion that we'll have tonight. As someone who loves quotes, I have been looking forward to this launch and just a discussion with Uschaba on his motivation on putting this collection together. And, before we get into the discussion, how great was the video? When I saw it last week, I was greatly impacted by it because I had started going through the material of the book, but to have some visual aspects of it in the form of the video just made things even more, it encouraged me and motivated me even more to read more of the quotes and the reflections that Uschaba shares with us. So everybody is some sort of crisis, in some stage of a crisis. And we'll find out more what that meant for Chaba and what it meant for the book and the collection in general. So before we get into the discussion, I'd like to just take us through the proceedings and order of the session so we all know and are aware of exactly what will be happening today. We'll have the introduction of our guest of honor and author. Um, there'll be an item on the story behind the book, content overview in conversation with author, and there will be closing remarks. This is a very interactive session, so we encourage you to share your comments and your questions, and as we go along in our discussion, we'll make reference to them. We'll give Chaba the opportunity to answer your comments and to answer any questions that you may have. So please feel free to join us at any point of the discussion, and we are open. We're open. This is a discussion. It's a conversation. It's not an interview. That's why I keep telling Chaba that it's not an interview. It's for us to just get to understand him but more as an author and to understand the motivation behind the book. And if anyone else has any questions over and above what I will have for him, please do join in. So Chaba is a financial analyst by formal training and a serial entrepreneur by calling. Most of his work today is spent as a senior customer strategy consultant, and he now proudly adds published author, which is why we're all here today. So I'd like to, without any further ado, introduce the man of the moment, Chaba. Chaba, welcome.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Anele, for that intro, and
Oh,
thank you to the very.
I'm having difficulty in hearing Chaba.
Yes, no, I think I was on mute by mistake. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you perfectly now.
Yes, no, I was saying thank you to yourself and the very many viewers who have taken time this evening to join us as we launch this baby of mine. And I'm hoping that we'll have a very engaging exchange, and that they leave these 2 hours with more tools and perspectives to take on the future, with more behind their back. So thank you for that.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. So let's get right into it. We always think 2 hours is a long time, but it actually isn't. By the time we'll check, it'll be 7:45 and our time will be over. So I think we should really just get into, the discussion. Um, so I've had the pleasure of and the privy of reading the book beforehand. And like I told you earlier, I'm a big book reviewer, so I'm hoping I won't spoil the launch for our readers and our list and our viewers and our audience. But in your preface, you have this line that starts off everything, and for me, it was so powerful, and I think it's what's going to lead us in you telling us the story behind the book. So that line says, "Behind every strong person is a story that left them with no choice." you know. And before we get to the story that left you with no choice, can you maybe briefly just tell us why why being an author now? Is it something that you've always wanted to do, or was it by chance?
Yeah, so thank you for that. So the title of author has always been an ambition of mine. However, it became more pressing when, the message that I've tried to articulate as best as possible through this book became more pressing, and the situation that I found myself in necessitated that I do something therapeutic for my own benefit, and I felt that through sharing some reflections along with quotes that also encapsulates many other phrases and principles and teachings and learnings on aspects of life that are very prominent and important. I felt that would enable me to find peace myself, and then secondly to reach more people than I would otherwise have been able to in person. So I guess a book is a vessel of knowledge, and it enables one to cast one's message as widely as possible. So people who do not necessarily know me personally will now be able to access some of my thinking and hopefully derive the kind of value from the content that will also liberate them in their own healing, their own progression, moving forward. Because as you mentioned, the quote that underlies a lot of the reflections and the writing of the book itself. The notion of strong people
we probably all have at least, knowledge of one strong person in our minds. And the problem with society is that we always tend to think that those strong people do not need us, right? They
Mm.
are there as a source of strength. And to a very large extent, strong people are actually, people who are also emotionally vulnerable, sensitive. They've just not only figured out a way to hide it, but more often than not, it has been as a matter of necessity. So, as that quote says, behind every strong person is a story that left them no choice. And I think underlying that is, you'll never know how strong you are until being strong is your only option. So I think what happens is life
Yeah.
throws punches at you in true fashion of what life does. And, to the extent that you overcome your challenges, you find yourself in a position where, wow, I didn't die. But the perception that then society and people get is that you did it without any scars or without any suffering because you didn't show. I mean, there's another quote that I'm always sharing with my kids and those around me. It says, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because you do not see it doesn't mean it's not there. And the thing about strong people, society has somewhat decided for them that fine, you have shown traits and signs of strength, so
Yeah.
we cannot expect for you to be vulnerable. It'll be such a shock to the system seeing someone who you've perceived to be strong actually, showing signs of vulnerability and humanness, which is inevitable. But I think it then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because they then realize that this is what people are expecting of them and then try to
Yes.
play that part. So it's a very, very pertinent topic. And I think I suspect a lot of the people who will find, this book interesting are people who see themselves as strong. But, even the strongest person has vulnerabilities, has moments of sensitivity, and, that human element to us. So you are allowed to be vulnerable. Your emotions do
Mm.
matter. Your well-being, your mental well-being is important. And, society's demands and expectations do not need to dictate your reality.
Absolutely, I agree with everything that you have said, and I think I've always considered myself as a strong person, and other people around me as well. I mean, you know me as well, and I think for me that's why I was so interested in being involved, especially with this project of yours, because I also know the kind of strong person that you are. So when you opened up about some of the things that you've been going through, I was like, I definitely want to be part of this because of that vulnerability. And you mentioned punches along the way. Is that was that the motivation? And I think with the vulnerability part is especially important because as a male and a black male, that is something that is not encouraged in society. So where did you find the motivation to say, yes, I'm this black male who's supposed to be strong and, but I'm actually just going to write this to help people because of what I have gone through?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. I mean, you know, looking at the issues of the day. I mean, at present we're dealing with this new variant that's led to South Africa being on the red list again,
Mm,
along with many of the Southern African countries. So we have health pandemics or health catastrophes. We've got natural catastrophes, but I think the real catastrophe that we're dealing with as men and women as well in South Africa is that of mental health. The statistics show by the World Health Organization, this was I think in 2019, that South African males, or the suicide rate among South African males is the second highest in the world after Russia. Combined with the female suicide rate, it's very close to tipping that first place, which is taken by Russia. So, you know, it always seems a bit far fetched until it hits close to home. I mean, in the past month alone, I've had a relative of mine who committed suicide. I've also then had a relative of my partner, or a friend to my partner had their sibling, commit suicide and kill his life partner or his wife in the process. So it it put me in a position where, just to give a bit of detail around what I went through. I mean, it was a culmination of somewhat of a business deal gone wrong and a long time struggle that I'd
mm,
had, with substances like alcohol that I used as a crutch, and that I needed to really internally search for the answers to not only why am I doing this, because it's clearly self-destructive, but how, after identifying those root causes, how am I going to then change the cause of my reality, the trajectory of my life for the better. So I was at a point where I felt like the world had dealt me a blow. What I knew is that it wasn't the final blow. It was a big blow
Yeah.
nonetheless. So I think the question I then asked myself, from a point of anger, was how did I let this happen? And then more importantly, what am I going to do about it? You know,
Yeah.
once you become a parent and once, your life roles take on the responsibility of, others looking up to you, it's no longer about yourself alone. So what I knew is that one, I need to continue to set an example because I've got kids, I've got a partner, I've got a family who are looking to me not only for an example, but are taking strength from all of my achievements. And I guess at that point in time, I felt that I was not, allowed to be vulnerable and show signs of failure or weakness. But, I'm a realist. Part of the process that I went through in dealing with the whole substance abuse and alcohol and stuff was having to face the facts. Before you face the facts, nothing will change. And if you change nothing, nothing will change, right? So the facts of the matter were, I was in the position I was in. I've got people who are looking up to me. Now I've got a choice. I'm either
Mm.
going to let this, be the final blow and determine my future for me, or I'm going to take that energy and turn it into something positive. So this book in question was, you could say, if I used an analogy, you could say I was pregnant for 2 years and I was in labor for a month. Because when I got to that point, I was angered enough to, eliminate all excuses and self talk out of actually putting the thoughts that I had onto paper and actually getting it out there. So look, what got me to that position was a position of anger after doing an internal inventory of what got me into the position I was in at that point, realizing that I have as a figure who has people looking up to me, it's no longer about me anymore. So
Yeah.
I need to be real in terms of my current position, but I also need to be on the front foot in terms of what I'm going to do about the situation. So I guess I was angry enough to wake up at 4 a.m. for a month and actually put this down on paper. But yeah, it was from a position of real, emotional strife. I was in a bit of turmoil. So this was actually part of my therapy.
Well, thank you for your anger and your, your emotional strife because it led us to you being able to put this together. And I think from what I've learned with my journey and opening up is a lot of people then gain strength from you opening up. You know, they may not feel like they are ready to talk about what's happening, but they may engage you and they may engage the material that you're sharing with us. And like you're saying, for you, it was your therapy. This book could be someone's therapy. Um, interestingly, you mentioning, mental health, suicide, and all that, and also you saying you got to a point of what are you going to do about it? And I think a lot of people maybe don't get to that point, or they just give up before, and they're very close to getting to that point that you can actually change. You've mentioned you had your family and your children that you people who are looking up to you, so you were just like you have to do it for them. What would you just with talking about the book and how it was so therapeutic for you, but how would you suggest someone who's at that point where they just want to give up, but it's so close to them doing something about it? Like, what would you advise them to do?
Sure. That is a fantastic question. And I guess it speaks to what the practicalities are of how I envision somebody making use of this book. So before I get into that, I'll use an analogy, right? So I always speak of this story of a pair of twins, a set of twins that were born to a single alcoholic mother. So the conditions that they were born into, could be better to say the least. But nonetheless, fast forward, one of them turns out to be a successful entrepreneur. The other turns out to be an alcoholic themselves, not having really, achieved or realized the potential that they had. And when asked why they think their lives turned out the way they did, the interesting thing is that their answers were identical, because my mother was an alcoholic. So, underlying that observation or the story in that this analogy, same circumstances, different view or perspective or lens on a set of realities can have a markedly different outcome. So, how I perceive somebody utilizing and making the best use of this book is the reflections that I have shared, I feel should be almost like a launch pad, right? In that moment of darkness and strife, each reflection aims to share how I have made sense of that particular topic and what I have resolved from somewhat an analytical and also experiential perspective. What they then have access to are the many other quotes in that same category that they can make use of to also derive different meanings. Now, this is very important because, the mindset that you have when approaching any new piece of information is very important because, it's also said that in the process of education, you can drown in all the information. So that comes from the quote by Sun Tzu that says, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Life will teach you lessons, but you'll keep recycling them until they are learnt, right?
Yeah.
So this book is aimed to give you a tool, right, that you can use without having to engage with anyone else, in one situation. Go through the reflections as per my, understanding and my making sense of the particular topic. You then go through, these are quotes by prominent figures on how they articulated a very precise principle on that particular topic. And look, again, the point I keep making about this book is that it's not a swallow whole book. It's not intended for you to read it in one go because your life circumstances change at any point in time. And in the true spirit of the teacher appearing when the student is ready, when you and the reflections is markedly different. So it gives people a tool for perspective that will be best utilized when crisis hits in a particular aspect of life.
So, do you think a book that you can read numerous times, it's not a once-off read at that point of either you're, like I was asking, you're at that almost giving up stage, but even maybe when you're overcome that giving up stage, you can still go back and pick your book up and it will still be relevant to any stage of your life, not necessarily when you're almost about to give up or you in deep in that crisis mode.
Definitely. I don't like using this analogy, but much like the Bible as a piece of reference text for, religion in the Christian sense, you can pick it up at any point in time, and there are verses that are very specific to your current reality that will totally alter your perspective and give you that spiritual nourishment, right? So you could call this a piece of text meant for emotional nourishment.
Okay. I think you've really covered, like a lot of the motivation around the book, especially from your own story. I think I'd like us to move to the content overview, which you have alluded to a bit as we are talking. But when you look at the content and when you look specifically at the titles of the different chapters, there's a big focus, on self-forgiveness, self-respect, self-mastery. Was the focus on self deliberate?
Thanks for that question. And the answer is a resounding yes. Because, everything, there's a quote in the book that goes, man's chief delusion is the idea that his circumstances are not as a result of his own thinking. If you believe that you are not able to overcome your current challenge, as Henry Ford said, you are right. Whether you believe you can or not, you are right, right? So that speaks to fixing your internal, I would say, mindset, but also your paradigm, the lens through which you evaluate realities. And, it also takes a very astute ability to, accept reality for what it is. Part of the biggest problem or stumbling block behind people achieving this self-mastery is the illusion that there is more in their control than there actually is, right? There is a lot that we are not able to determine. I mean, just look at your physical features. I speak about it in the book that, people who are, good looking as per society's, terms, have just won the genetic lottery, much like someone, through a stroke of luck wins the financial lottery. There's a lot that is out of your control. You don't know when you leave the house now, simply going to buy a loaf of bread, whether you're going to come back alive. The perception that tomorrow is guaranteed is a big flaw. I mean, Mark Twain also mentions that people have lived two lives, and the second one begins when they realize that they only have one, right? So having that astute ability to accept what is out of your control and fully embrace and make full use of what is, because the only thing that is in your control is yourself and your perception of reality. It's a perception thing. I mean, I also have to make an example. Depression, as rife as it is, being a mental illness. A person who is depressed feels like there is no hope for them to continue living, right? It is a perception. That's why you find situations that will almost baffle you. Somebody being wealthy and well off in in the world's terms, but living a miserable life, and to them they're depressed and willing to take their life, their own life. So it being a matter of perception, fixing and making full use of your capabilities to influence self, and realizing that that's actually the only thing you have control over, is the bane of not only one's existence, but the fervor with which you will approach the future. Sure. So yeah, look, man, I think it also brings me to a couple of other points that we'd need to consider. The analogy that I used about the twins and how they managed to make the best different use of their realities through their perception also speaks to this work on self. Because I mean, there's a notion that goes, when you reach a new level, prepare for a new devil, and that you should be careful what you wish for. So at any point in time, if you are not happy where you are, chances of you being happy at any other place are very slim. So again, back to the notion of control of self, and self being at the center of the positioning of many of the themes and the chapters that we have decided, or that I decided rather, to focus on, is a very pertinent theme. Because as I mentioned a bit earlier, this being a piece of text that should be used as a reference for emotional nourishment, it is a journey that you will have to travel alone. Fortunately, more fortunately than unfortunately, because at the end of the day, it is your own destiny that you need to realize. So yeah, self being the key theme is something that I think we cannot run away from. Yeah. So yeah, guys. So I think I'm just going to elaborate further on some of the chapters or the sections and the thinking behind how they were set out the way they are. So I think we started with self mastery, and the thinking there is from a foundational perspective. We need to really make sense of and really get to the heart of issues that are centered around mastering oneself, right? because emotional stability from that perspective is what will position you to then be able to tackle things like, self-healing, to then tackle matters of success, dealing with failure, leadership, and other elements that I feel, actually work from a foundation of self, of a concrete sense of self. So, yeah, look, I think, without getting too much into the detail of the actual contents of the book, because
Sorry. Yeah. I've been having very bad connection issues today.
No problem.
Sorry
No
about
problem,
that.
Anna.
You just let me know where you are.
Elaborating further on the concept of self being at the heart of how we positioned many of the chapter framings and the outlines around self-healing, self-mastery, forgiveness of self, etc.
All right. I hope all our guests were able to hear you better than I was. But I think just with the quotes now, there are millions and millions of quotes, really, really good ones out there, and you've picked some of the best. But how do you get to the process of choosing those? Because it must have been quite a task for you.
No, thanks for that question, Anela. So, look, as I mentioned, the concept of the book I had for about 2 years. I've always had very deep conversations aimed at really, getting to, when I meet someone, I really want to get to know them. One, I'm really not a fan of small talk. And I think the reason why I've gravitated towards quotes from a young age before I even realized, made sense of what's going on, is that there's such depth to quotes, right? So, I remember after a conversation with a colleague of mine in a firm that I was working at, a consulting firm I was working at about 2 years ago. I kept jokingly telling her that she's very talented in coaching and getting the best out of people. To which she replied that, look, I'm also one of my strengths or abilities is, really uncovering deeper meanings, so to say, on particular issues / quotes. I've always spoken in parables and quotes, etc., mostly from a humorous perspective. But then I realized when more than one person told me the same thing that, there might be something here. So what I then knew is that, look, I'm going to write a book about quotes. But, from the onset, it's a question of how are you going to structure it? Am I just going to collect quotes and then put them out there? So, I started searching on the web. And what I quickly realized was, these quotes were in various themes. And although there are very many options that one can, choose from in the myriad of themes that are available, what I knew is that the quotes I would want to focus on would be those that focus on healing, really getting to better understand oneself, and positioning one to make the most of their future. So how I went about it, desktop research, I actually found from a couple of resources. I remember, it took me about 2 months and I'd collated about 2,000 quotes. I felt good about myself until I bumped into another source that had 40,000 quotes. So, I got that, and I guess then the first step was let's go through this list and actually, categorize it, make sense of it in the various themes. And that's what I did. In the true spirit of, measuring twice and cutting once, I then categorized the various quotes. The next process was, okay, what order makes the best sense, right? In terms of putting these into a publication that will be of value to people. That was the next step. So I narrowed it down to about 10,000 quotes. I then, categorized them, and within each category there were, 800, 900. So I knew for sure that I'm not going to write, a textbook, 1,000-page textbook. So I needed to then limit myself. So I've gone no more than 100 in some of the sections of quotes. And then once I had that, it was literally about, framing in my mind how I would articulate whatever reflection or essay I was going to write about it. Because if you think about it, the next question is then, okay, I've got these cool quotes, they're in some fantastic categories. What am I going to say about them? So getting to a decision around how I would frame the narrative and the position or my voice to be consistent across all these themes, and really have a focus on, I think I've tried to focus on two things in my reflections. One, how I've made sense of it, and I've taken a very analytical approach. So in most cases, I've broken it down into subtopics. So I would break it down into like 3, 4, 5, 6 elements about a particular topic, get into a bit of detail around each one. And because, again, I want someone to leave the conversation or, reading this text with something tangible, I get to a conclusion for each one. So I think I was actually thinking about it the other day. When I pass away, everything that I've written is what my view is on any particular topic. When I die, go and read my reflection on death. We have managed to beat death. People only die to the extent that they are forgotten, right? And people people who have lived their lives to the fullest are never really scared to die. Another aspect, I need to bring in is, one of my key motivations is, I'm actually driven by a fear of the ghost of my potential when I do pass away. And I think death, it's one of the essays or one of the topics I cover, and my reflection on it covers various aspects of it. But I think from an alternative view, we should view death with more of a positive lens. Without death, there wouldn't be an urgency to really live in the moment, right? And without the concept of death, one would not have to face issues like, what is the meaning of life? What happens on the other side, etc. So, look, anything that, if you want to know my view on anything, it's captured in the book. When I do pass away at some point in time, I will be happy when that happens, because I've left a legacy of my view on anything so that my kids and my family will not have any doubt around, what would Sechaba do in situation X.
Okay, from like 10,000 quotes and bring down, it must have been quite a few. So, when you were saying that you already had all these quotes 2 years ago, when you had them, did you have them because you always wanted to write this particular kind of book, or it was just quotes that you're collecting, and along the way, you then thought of the idea of putting them together in a publication, or it was just, I love these are my favorites, I'm going to have a file of them,
I'm sorry, Anil, your audio is a little bit low. Could you please repeat that question?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
So the question is, you mentioned that 2 years ago, you had some of these quotes already. When you had them, was it because you already knew you were going to put them in a book, or were you just collecting your favorite quotes, and then along the way, the idea of the publication came along? Because, you had 10,000. That's quite a lot.
I knew that I wanted to write a book, right? So I guess, when I collected the quotes, I knew exactly that I'd write a book. At that point, I remember there was another guy who, there are a couple of books that are just collection of quotes, right? There was another guy South African, young black guy, who also released a book about quotes at that point. And it was also almost like an anthology or collection of quotes. So, in the spirit of not necessarily only being different, but trying to push it to the next level. What are the so whats, right? What are the key takeaways that that I would be deriving on any particular topic, and then how would I then share it in a manner that would, make the best sense? So, I knew that I wanted to put them into a book. I guess the reason why I was pregnant with the idea for so long is that I knew I needed to do justice to the depth of the quotes at any point in time when I do finally get to, putting my thoughts on paper.
Okay. And, with that, because you had to cut it down to such few quotes, the ones that you weren't able to put into this book, will there be a second book following with other quotes to use, you know?
In the spirit of loving quotes, winners know when to quit. So, in terms of quotes on these particular topics, there won't be another book exactly like this. But the beauty of this is, again, this book is meant as a tool, a conversation starter, right? So those other quotes can then be used as auxiliary, pieces of information and auxiliary perspectives on these particular topics, if and when people feel the need. That's actually a great point. I can actually make them available on my website, where people on any particular topic can see the other quotes. I'm hoping that also through this interaction, people will be able to share their favorite quotes using the hashtag don't quote me on that, and then start the conversation, because look, quotes are a dime a dozen. The problem is when are you going to get access or be exposed to the right quote that will have the best impact, maximum impact, when you need it most. And I guess this concept of vulnerability, really, it's pervasive, because when you're vulnerable, you really you're now opening up. There's another quote that says, the thing about love songs is when you're happy, you hear the melody, but when you're sad, you really get to understand what the words mean, right? So yeah, they're there. I can make them available as auxiliary pieces of content for conversations moving forward. But what I really, really encourage and what I'm hoping for is for the engagement moving forward to really be fruitful, because it's only as useful as with any other tool. It's only as useful as how people use it.
That's true. That's true. And then getting to the name of the book, it's a great play on words, by the way. Because I know that when you work on such a project, before you actually come, unless you already had the name from the very beginning, how did you get to the name of this collection? Did you have other names that you played around with and you had to kind of get people to help you choose, or was it very easy for you to say, when this is finished, this is what this book is going to be called, this is how the color is going to look, this is how the layout is going to look? Because I think we never also think about that. So much goes into choosing all those things besides the actual content, but the effect, if I can call it, of the material. How did you come up with the name?
Thank you for a fantastic question, Anele. And this really brings me to a very important theme that keeps recurring throughout my reflections. So, there's this notion that we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience, right? So my theory, as shared in one of my quotes, in one of my reflections, is that we are spiritual frequencies, essentially, right? Every identity or every person resonates at a very unique spiritual frequency, much like your fingerprint, right? So there's also another quote that says, people might forget what you said to them, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. We are energy emitting beings at the end of the day. Being in people's presence, in somebody's presence, can have the biggest impact, right? So that being said, we're spiritual beings, right? At the core, having a human experience. We resonate at a particular frequency. So coming back to the name of the book, I knew that the name that I would get to would have to be punchy, catchy, encapsulate the spirit of the book and the messages that I'm trying to get across. But when I came across this theory of resonating at spiritual frequencies, I also encountered a said guru whose view on life is that there's a concept of the creation of the world. The scientists call it the Big Bang, but at some point all of this around here came into being. Now how he made sense of it was, upon that starting point, the answers to all the questions to come in future were already also unleashed into the universe. You know, bringing it into our current context, there's also the notion that, you know, although our problems in society seem to be aplenty, but each problem has a corresponding solution, right? So what I then deduced, I knew, is that, look, there's an answer to this, to my question around what the title of my book should be. The only problem at that point was that I was not resonating at the spiritual frequency required to materialize it into the physical realm, right? It also speaks to a quote by Michelangelo, where he says that, you know, he saw an angel in the marble and carved until he set him free. What that says is that within you lies every potential self that you could be. Anele the scientist is within you. Anele the Olympic athlete is within you. Anele the poet is within you. And I think she is alive and kicking. But nonetheless, to bring any of your potential to life, you need to resonate at the frequency required to actualize that, you know, particular manifestation of your potential into the physical sense. So applying it to my name question, I had not yet resonated at the frequency to manifest the name of my book into the physical sense. So I knew I needed more to increase my spiritual frequency. So I started reading more, especially around books in this very same category. I started listening to more podcasts. I started doing, you know, meditation, trying to really get in tune with, there's this concept of an inner voice. But nonetheless, I knew that the answer was there, but I also knew that I would need to think differently to actualize the answer. You know, as Albert Einstein says, you cannot get to a solution using the same approach that landed you in your problem, right? So yeah, through active effort, I then managed to, you know, some may say I landed on this name, but I knew when I came across it that this is the frequency. This is the frequency I've been looking for. That's the name that encapsulates the essence of the book, and this is what I'm going to go with.
That's very interesting. It is definitely punchy. So you got that on point. And what about you know, I spoke about the layouts, the cover design. Did you also spend some time on that, just as you did with the title, or once you had the name of the book, was it much easier then for the rest of the aesthetics of it?
Yeah, thanks, Anele. So, yeah, look, I've always had a knack for branding, and I guess it also speaks to another topic of perception actually driving reality. But what I knew is that, you know, the cover image needs to speak to the essence of the content without the need of text. So, quotes, you know, what came to mind was, you know, calligraphy, you know, old school writing on papyrus and, you know, reeds and stuff. So there had to be some element of, you know, calligraphy type of writing, right? So we ended up with an image, or the brief that I gave the designers was to use, you know, an image of a pen, you know, those really formal pocket type pens. And there must be an element of writing there, because I think when I think about quotes, I think about, you know, essentially pieces of, or nuggets of wisdom that have been captured through text and shared momentarily, you know, in the most relevant moments for maximum impact. So, yes, I had a very clear idea of what I wanted to be on the book. I knew it had to do with writing, calligraphy. There needed to be an image of a pen. It needed to be interesting. It needed to be exciting and enticing. So, look, I briefed the designers. I got a couple of options, and, you know, the cover, the design that we ultimately landed on, you know, my vote only counted as one. I engaged with a couple of my family members and my friends, and we got to what I think is a winner.
Okay, I really like the cover. I like the gray, I like the white. And when you actually get into the book, it's kind of a nice flow from the cover into how the layout and the inside is. So well done on that, and like you said, um, you know, everything kind of speaks to each other. So you don't have to wonder like, why did he choose that title? Why did he choose that cover design? It really just already by looking at it, you know what the book is about, you know what to expect inside, which is always very important for the reader, is to already connect with the name of the book, to connect with the design of the book before they even get into the material inside. So thank you for that. Our guests, I hope you are finding value in this discussion so far. Please do send us your comments, any questions that you may have for Uschaba. I have a few questions, and maybe because now we're getting into the conversation with the author, and maybe from the questions that I have, they might prompt some comments and questions from your side. So please do feel free to send them. I will read them as we go along. So I've got these two questions. They're interlinked, but I'd like you to answer them separately. You can choose which one to answer, but they're based on the process of writing. So it's, what was the most difficult part of the process, and what was the most rewarding part of the process? And you can answer whichever one first, because I think we maybe from my side, as a reader, I'm confused. I always know, like, when the author was writing a book, what were they going through? What did they feel? And things like that. What was difficult for them? What gave them joy? So we just understand also your feeling, because right now we're just happy there is the publication, but there's a whole process that goes through it, and you have explained how you put the contents together, but the whole process of it, what was difficult for you and what was rewarding for you?
Thanks for that, Anelia. Yeah, so in a nutshell, I'm just going to repeat the question to you. Let me know if I heard you correctly. You asked what were the key challenges, what was more rewarding about the book, and then just a bit of an elaboration around the process. Is that it? Cool. So I guess the biggest challenge for me was starting. As cliche as it sounds, and in the spirit of measure twice, cut once, you're never really sure about when to start, right? And when you do start, I guess there's this anxiety and hesitation around, will I have enough content, right? And will I articulate it as best as possible? Will I do justice to this topic that is so dear to my heart? And will the output as a result get the message across? Because in my reflection on communication, I speak about, one of the key illusions about the process of communication is that it's happened, right? Any two parties exchanging information in the process or pursuit of communicating a point, a lot can be lost, let alone in translation, but in misinterpretation. So, will I have enough content? That was the first thing. And I realized, after, listening to a couple of podcasts, reading books, following other prominent writers, that there is no perfect start. The first iteration or the first, piece of content that you get on is definitely not where what will make it into the book, but you need to start somewhere. So the most difficult thing was establishing a routine. So I think I touched on this a little bit earlier, but my routine was waking up really early. So I used to wake up at about 4 a.m. And because, I realized what a distraction cell phones can be, because, by the way, data suggests that, most people look at one of the prominent, social media platforms within 40 seconds of them waking up. I knew that I couldn't afford to have that distraction. So my routine was as follows: wake up, take a shower, don't even look at my phone, go downstairs, sit in front of my laptop. Whatever the topic of my writing for that day was, that's what got my first 2 hours of the day. Because there's another quote that says, you should focus your most productive time not on the biggest problems, but on the biggest opportunities. And as I mentioned a bit earlier, this process was therapeutic for myself. You get to really, understand your own thinking, because there's another school of thought that, the reason why authors need to read is because reading forces you to think, and in order to write well, you need to think well. So it forced me to cross-check and double-check my own thoughts before I put them down. But then it also allowed me to express my creativity, For those, looking back, I've got some nostalgic memories. I've got some fun memories of those, morning writing sessions, because, I would actually reward myself with a cup of coffee when I was done. And I knew I was done when 2 hours was up. So I timed myself, and I guess it worked out within a 15 to 20 minute margin of error. It became so therapeutic. After the first few times, that initial inertia is what potentially holds you back. But once you get to, like 10,000 words, 20,000 words, you're 14 days in, you look back and you're like, wow, I did not realize that, I had a feeling that I was capable of it, but actually doing it, right? So trying to almost like distill some of the key aspects that initially were challenges, but ultimately turned into, the strengths and what I would actually look forward to. What's that routine, right? Wake up without, opening myself up to any distractions, get in front of my laptop. And again, it was a place where I got to express myself. It was a place where I got to air my views. It was a place where I really got to share and articulate my views. Also, not from the perspective of, this is going to be mocked. I'm so anxious and scared about what people's perception is going to be about the content. I had already made peace with the fact that, again, the outcome is out of my control. I have no control over how many people are watching this. I have no control over how many people are going to buy the book. I have no control over how many people are going to read the book. All I had control over, and what I made the most of, was how I showed up in articulating my feelings, views, thoughts, and conclusions on each and every one of the topics that I wrote about. I wanted to do it justice, and through reading and engaging with each one, the reader will really get to understand, how I articulate things, one, and secondly, hopefully leave with, wow, I didn't think about it that way, or that is a really interesting, thought-provoking / controversial way of looking at things. At the heart of the matter, I am devoid from the outcome. I, in line with what I feel my purpose is, needed to get this out, right? Whomsoever finds value in the content, and whomsoever derives the kind of meaning that propels them forward in their moments of crisis, man, that's, I think, even if it touches one person, I am happy. I am at peace. I always needed to make sure that at the end of each reflection, even after the editing process, I guess my yardstick was, am I happy? And I think, just to almost touch on my religious inclinations as well, it comes through in my reflection about God, where I really interrogate the concept of God. Is it a he, she? Is it a it? Does it really exist? In what form? Where is it located? And again, I also then share in that conclusion that, I've chosen to live in line with the values of the Christian faith, living in line with, the kingdom. And in so doing, that is how I've rationalized, the concept of God. So the silent prayer that I continue to make whenever I start any piece of work is, God, may people see you through my work. And at the end of each reflection, at the end of piece of work that I put down, I was at peace with what I had put down. I was at peace that it was a process that was driven by the higher spiritual being of my understanding, and I was happy, still as happy as I am now. Because as I mentioned, if you are not happy in the moment where you are, the chances of you being happy and content in any other place are minimal to none. So those were the key challenges, and I think what I took from it was a strengthened sense of self-assuredness. You know, I also touch on this in my quote on abilities and learning as well. In my reflection on abilities and learning, you know, self-assuredness is very different from. It's not to be mistaken with cockiness or overconfidence. It is a strong yet resolute and calm, you know, faith in one's own abilities. With each reflection that I completed, with each 1,000 words that I managed to pen down, my resolve was strengthened that not only am I healing through this process, because as mentioned up front, this was also a big part of my healing, but I've also really tapped into what I feel my purpose is, right? And this concept of purpose, there's also another reflection on, you know, on purpose. You know, what is this idea of purpose? You know, I know people live their lives, and you know, in mainstream media, we have motivational speakers who aim to, you know, share content that will help one align with their purpose. What is this purpose? Because, you know, a very important underlying element of this purpose is an element of virtue. Why? We are born with different talents of, you know, different kinds. Some virtuous, some not. Some people are better liars than others. But is person X in line with their purpose meant to be a world-class liar, right? I'd argue not. And the next sort of phase of thinking is, you know, the purpose that people ought to pursue, which is a normative statement, but that's a story for another day, ought to be in line with what the world needs, right? So purpose to me entails an audit, an inventory of one's capabilities. If you are a capable liar, it's probably not what the world needs. But your purpose would then be that overlap between what your capabilities are, what the world needs and values, and ultimately, you know, what will not feel like work to you. Because I think you asked me about, you know, the quotes, the additional surplus quotes that didn't make it into the book, what the plan is for them. Is there possibly a second book on the cards? And as I mentioned, there will not be another book of this nature. However, as an extension of this, the conversation, if we think about it through, don't quote me on that, is centered around meaning, right? Again, as was you know, alluded in the intro video, everybody you meet is either in a crisis, coming out of crisis, or heading towards a crisis. This is a book for crisis. I did mention that it's a bite and chew book for one to derive the kind of meaning in that crisis that will propel them forward. So on the concept of meaning, the conversation around this piece of text centers around meaning. If we take it, you know, to its next logical conclusion or discussion, one may argue, my next book or publication will be about purpose. And what about purpose? I've already begun to allude on some of the concepts I'll be touching on. Your purpose should ideally be in line with what the world needs and what you are capable of, what the world values, and hopefully what the world is willing to remunerate quite well, or through which you're able to capture value. But to the end that this purpose that you have, you know, reached clarity or light on as a result of meaning that you derive from very differing perspectives will ultimately get you to a point of optimal productivity, because the world needs more people who are operating in their flow. And people will not operate in their flow if there's no purpose in what they're doing. And purpose and meaning are very closely related, because in any activity or work which is defined as any dedicated effort, in any work, there are elements that one may not enjoy. But to the extent that they have meaning and there's a purpose behind those activities or actions, it really catalyzes the flow state which the world so badly needs. I mean, there are buzzwords like the fourth
Can
industrial
I, can I,
revolution.
sorry,
Sorry,
sorry, Tava, can I come in there because you're mentioning something very interesting, and stuff that I'm currently just, going through and doing as well. Purpose and impact. Early on, when you answered this question, you mentioned how for you it wasn't about how many people are going to buy the book, how many, and all that. Because a lot of the time we do things because we like, who's gonna buy it, who's gonna watch this, who's gonna be the audience, is it gonna be you and I speaking to each other? And we spoke about that when we were preparing, a few weeks ago. What if then it's just the two of us and no one is interested in joining in? And you were like, well, then it's just a conversation with both of us, When did you get to that point, just in your life in general, where because I know for me, it has taken, I think, about the past 17 months in the journey of my mental health and my healing, recovery, for me to be like, you know what, I need to do things that are impactful, and I need to do things that are going to make me happy, and try and heal people and share myself with people, even if it's one person. How did you get to that point, and when did you get to that point? But before you answer that, when did you know that you were actually done with writing the book? That is a question from Umfundo. When did you know that you were actually done with writing the book? So maybe you can answer Umfundo first before you answer my question.
Okay. Anel, we're inundated with questions here. I got your initial question around when I got to when and how I got to a point where I was devoid of the outcome of anything that I do. But can you just repeat Mfundo's question again, so that I can address it first before getting into that one? Anele? Oh, when did you know that you were actually done with writing the book? Okay. Yeah, so I've gotten Mfundo's question. Look. Wow, that's actually a fantastic question.
Can you hear me?
I guess when, I guess, when using the same analogy that I was pregnant for 2 years, in labor for a month. When I was at a point where, one, the volume of what I've written is not too overwhelming. The number of themes / topics that I've selected are not necessarily exhaustive, but they cover enough scope that majority of life's most important aspects are addressed. I knew then, when I reached about, there are 25 reflections in the book, right? Each of about 2,000 to 3,000 words. So it's, again, in the thinking, or the line of thinking of measuring twice and cutting once. In the process of short listing the quotes, I already knew exhaustively what the set of themes is that I'd be covering. And when I reached that last quote or reflection on success, I knew then that if you think about it, I start off with this whole self-help and self-mastery. I then go on to self-forgiveness and healing. Starting with the self, ultimately getting to success. And funny enough, my reflection on success centers around how to deal with failure, right? So once I finished writing that reflection on failure, I knew that, I've reached a really advanced stage. And sometimes it's a very astute skill getting to understand what is enough. So I knew at that point that was enough. Fundo, I hope I articulated well. I'm going now to come to Anele, your question around, how did I get to a point where, I'm not really phased whether or not, many people join the discussion, many people buy. And, there's a very interesting effect about quantifying, qualitative phenomena into, be it formulas or data, etc. And someone actually made an attempt at quantifying or creating a formula for disappointment. So how they put it is disappointment equals expectation minus reality. If you continue for a very long time, I live life as a people pleaser, and I think, the whole aspect of being a people pleaser, there are some positives to it, but it becomes negative when it becomes self-destructive, when you please others at your own expense. So I quickly realized anything that you do will always evoke some sort of reaction. People will always talk, be it you're doing something good or bad, people will always talk, and people only judge and perceive from their point of view, right? From their culmination of life experiences and from their identity. So the constant search for external approval that I was a victim of for the longest time constantly led to disappointment, because, again, using this formula, expectation minus reality, my expectation was a cause and effect relationship. I do this, I work hard, therefore people should be happy for me. I work hard, I do X, therefore people should receive it well. And after being constantly disappointed and realizing that a lot is actually outside of your control, your inner peace is guarded, or is really resulting from your adjustment of your expectations to reality. And what was my expectation? My own happiness is judged by my own expectation of reality, right? I do something because I am self-driven and self-assured, and my biggest competition is my previous performance. However, that shows up to somebody else. If they receive it well, that's fantastic. If they don't, that's also great. I speak to the key quote that got me to write this book, and that continues to influence my mindset. It's by Socrates, right? When I die, please share this at my funeral. He says, remember that nothing is stable in human affairs. Therefore, avoid undue elation in prosperity and undue depression in adversity. What that means, in the biblical sense, we can derive meaning from the seasons, the seasons of famine that God's people went through. Every beginning is another beginning's end, right? There's a season for everything. There's a cycle for everything. You're happy now, there will come a time where you are down and you are sad. However, realizing and accepting that it is not permanent, and secondly, much of it is out of your control. All you have control over is how you react to it, right? Again, on this notion of reality being driven to a large extent by perception. If I perceive myself to be a failure as a result of only 5 people buying the book, or only 20 people being on in a podcast, that means I've already handed the power over, right? The sources of power that control my sense of fulfillment and happiness are then outside of myself. Once I made that realization, 1, people will talk regardless. 2, expectation minus reality equals disappointment. So to avoid disappointment, adjust your expectation. Do not link your expectation to external events, people, things, places, etc. Adjust it to your own capabilities, be your own competitor, biggest competitor, and you are bound to be happy because you are unfazed, both by praise nor criticism. You take it for what it is, we can engage on it, we can discuss it, unpack it, but I don't derive my sense of fulfillment from there. So I think that was the logic that I used in getting to my current mind frame. People will always talk, right? Whether or not you do good, and even doing good is a value judgment. It's subjective. Do what makes you happy, right? And be your own yardstick for achievement and success. That way, nobody else will have control over your happiness.
Thank you for that. And what you said, it leads to my next question to you, actually. So it's interesting that without you even knowing what I was going to ask you, you kind of answered. So the question I have is, what perspectives or beliefs have you challenged with this book? You know, and I think picking up just from the beginning of our conversation, it's definitely what we spoke about earlier is mental health, you know, and specifically to do with Black men. It's a strong person notion, a vulnerability notion, and now it's that where you need to just get to a point where you're not a people pleaser, you're not doing things for people, you're doing things that make you happy, because we go through a majority of our lives trying to make everyone else happy at the expense of yourself, you know. So besides just those points, what other perspectives or beliefs do you think that you challenged with this book?
Thank you for that. Another fantastic question. I think the biggest and most glaring one is that you need permission to bring your ambitions into life. I used to talk myself out of a lot of opportunities and manifesting some of my potential. Vis-a-vis through this book, one could easily talk themselves into a downward spiral driven by, you know, I need a publisher, you know, I've never written anything. How am I going to articulate myself best? I'm not a good writer. The first thing that I challenge is you don't need permission. If you've got a message to get out there, put it down, get it out, and let's see what happens. 1. 2, the fact that I'm releasing the digital formats first. I mean, the publishing industry is based on the backbone of print, the print media. But, you know, we're moving into a new age where the consumption of content is vastly shifting. The trends are shifting. And it's a hypothesis of mine that, you know, especially the kind of content that is at the heart of my book, because it's a bite and chew, right? It's best or more easily consumed in digital format. So that's why I put together the audio book, I put together an ebook, right? So through that, I'm challenging the perception that it has to go to print first and print is at the heart of it. Because, again, my aim is for the content of this book to be conversation starters, right? It needs to be easily accessible for you to pull it out in a discussion with friends. When you're on a train ride somewhere, on a plane, you're in a different country, you are going through something. It's a piece of reference text that you can quickly pull out, you know, refresh your perspective here and there, and really pull out, you know, the nuggets that will get you to where you need to be. So just as a recap, 2. 1, you don't need permission to bring your ambitions into life. And then secondly, why should things be the way that people assume is the norm? Who decides what is normal, right? So let's challenge that. Trends are shifting. Access to platforms and self-publishing, you know, tools is increasing. So there's actually as I was making sense of it to myself, my, you know, arsenal of excuses was greatly diminishing to the question of why not? Why don't I do this?
Perfect. I think with the way you've answered that, you've really helped a lot of people. We have some questions from our guests, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. Kabulu Mabusa says, I'd like to know which quote particularly encapsulates your life right now. And before you answer that, there is also a comment that she had that I have noted. So she said, so profound, like how this book is aimed at reminding us of the things we already know, but have capsulated them and made it easy to refer back to. Thank you, Chaba. So you can just maybe respond to your question about the quotes in your life right now.
Thank you again for a fantastic question. I'm really happy, you know, that the audience is engaging. Kaburu, thank you for that question. And the quote that, you know, really encapsulates my life right now is by Dennis Waitley. And it says that, you know, it's not who you think you are that holds you back. It's who you think you're not, right? This speaks to the self-limitations, as I was alluding to in my previous answer, where people talk themselves out of a lot of potential to manifest, you know, what they could be. it's not who you think you are, it's who you think you're not. And as an extension, a very large part of getting to know who you are is getting to know who you're not, right? So at this point in my life, after realizing, and making sense of all of the, I won't say negative self-talk, but talking myself out of things that I was really capable of doing, I really had to challenge. What do I think I'm not, right? What identity am I assuming at any point in time? And I guess this concept of identity is also closely linked and very pervasive, right? Because, I think Sadhguru mentioned that identity, people have a very tough time with identity because we mistake it for a static concept. Identity is fluid, right? So at any point in time, you are an ocean, you're like water. Your identity flows. You cannot grasp it. It's there. It takes up space. It changes form. It's a shape-shifting being / entity. So it's a futile exercise trying to, grab onto that water at any point in time, closely define what you are. It's easier to know what you're not, right? So I guess then that what that speaks to and what it really narrows down is those aspects of your identity that you choose to perceive as true, that you choose to perceive as true enough to bring into a reality from your thoughts into actions, which become habits, which then influence your character and ultimately your identity. So again, just to recap, it's a quote by Dennis Waitley. It's not who you are that holds you back, it's who you think you're not. So I guess my question to the audience now is, who is it that you think you're not? What is the one biggest aspect of your life or your ambitions that you've been talking yourself out of for the longest time? And why do you think you are not that person?
Great, thank you so much for that. We have another question. From what I have gathered from this launch, you say a lot of profound things. Did you use any of your own quotes in the book? Otsile, yeah, so please. I love that question. You say a lot of profound things. The reflections are definitely yours. So I don't know if that will count as your own quotes. I can answer that part for you.
So there are a couple of layers to this question, right? One, I'm pretty sure everybody who's quoted did not know when they were saying what they said that, wow, this will be quotable and, will be mentioned for generations to come. Much in line with always performing in line with one's purpose. I'm also of the opinion that the prominent figures who we continue to quote on a daily basis shared those pieces of content driven by a purpose, and they had a particular meaning that they aimed to share at that point in time. Now that meaning then resonated with very many people, which led to said quote becoming a prominent one. So it is ultimately to the extent that people use the content that I've shared and specific lines that resonate with people that will prove to be quotable, right? To me, my entire reflection is a quote to myself, right? But to someone else, one line could change the entire perspective, right? You determine what is quotable for you. Do I use some of my quotes? Yes, because each of my reflections in its entirety is a quote of my own. So for you, those aspects of my reflections that resonate with you will be your quotes. Again, like I mentioned, this book is meant as a tool, a conversation starter, right? The meaning that you derive from it will be very different from what someone else derives from it. The lines that really hit home for you will be different to anyone else. So make it your own, because essentially it is there to alter your own perspective. It is there for you to use it to catalyze, your own rejuvenation, your own healing, your own, success. your own, progress on your journey to fulfillment. Whatever the case is, it is your journey. That's why, again, Anela, you did point out the whole concept of aligning with self, right? It is a very intimate journey, right? It is a very intimate journey. So people will quote what resonates with them, and this book is different for each and every person who will be consuming it.
Just on that, interestingly, my next question is, how would you describe the book's ideal reader? You've spoken about people who are in some sort of crisis, getting out of crisis, approaching crisis, conversation starters, and things like that. When you were putting everything together, did you have in mind that the ideal reader for the book would look like this, or can be described in this way? Can you share that with us?
Thanks again for that question. Yeah. So, I myself was the ideal reader when I started writing this book. I, for the first time, started considering giving up, right? So the ideal reader is someone who finds himself in a position where they did not foresee, right? They find themselves not being able to make sense of the emotions that they're going through as a result of many of life's challenges. Now, life has this very consistent ability to throw punches at you, right? Just when you think you figured things out, something else comes. And there's no one who is born with a guide to life. So by definition, everybody is trying to feel their way through this physical or human experience that we're having as spiritual beings, right? So the ideal person, just to put it more aligned with how I've articulated things in the book, the ideal reader is one whose spiritual frequency is experiencing agitation, right? The kind of agitation that is preventing it or hindering it from resonating at higher frequencies to manifest, greater, versions of themselves. Because I think I could have chosen to say it's for everyone, but I needed to get into a bit more detail because I needed to elaborate on what the use cases or what the necessary conditions are in which somebody will derive, maximum meaning from the content of this book. We are all spiritual beings having a human experience. We all, at some points in our lives, experience spiritual agitation, wherein our human form or the validity or whether or not it's still worth being in this human form becomes, questioned. Should I still be alive? Should I take my own life? What am I doing? Matters of an existential crisis. I think just to summarize it, spiritual agitation, right? Anybody experiencing spiritual agitation will resonate with this book. And again, that derives directly from the quote that we are not human beings having a spiritual experience, but spiritual beings having a human experience. Because, truth be told, when we do die or perish in the physical sense, our spirit continues to resonate. That's why, and I touch on this on my quotes about life and God, etc. One of the interesting things I find about African spirituality is, the whole concept of ancestors and appeasing ancestors, and I guess, acknowledging them, which tends to be misconstrued with worshipping them. But I think it's a very nifty way of having beaten death. Because if it is true that we only die when we're forgotten, that means in line with, religious systems where, cultural/traditional practices dictate that, spirits of yesteryear be remembered and acknowledged and appeased. That means your whole lineage never dies, right? So that is why I confidently say, if I were to die today, I would die happy, man. Why? I'm hoping that I'm not forgotten, because I'm hoping that I will leave something larger than myself as a legacy in this world. And then secondly, from a spiritual perspective, I am at peace. I feel that at any point in time, I have done my best to resonate at frequencies where, certain, manifestations of my potential have been brought to life. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for that answer. There's another
Here from Shia. She could quote book. What is your go-to quote when life struggles start to feel paralyzing to you? And there was also another, I think from the same coach as well, she had a comment earlier that was really inspiring. Dumeleng also had a comment earlier saying that having a digital launch is actually a game changer. Oh, there we go. Releasing a book in digital format is definitely a game changer. So thank you so much for the comments and the questions. And I think, Baba, if you can just answer Portia's question, when you feel like you are on a point of paralysis, what quotes from the book gets you going?
Wow. So I'm going to frame my answer to this by really touching on the concept of identity, right? So, Sadhguru, who is a mystic and yogi, she has a very interesting mental model around what identity is. So he says at any point in time, we are the culmination of our memories and our life experiences. I'll make an example. How do you know that you're rich? Or how do you know that you're poor? Because of the memory that, I don't have money, right? To the extent that we have held or we continue to hold on to our memories, that is a direct, contributing factor to our suffering. So, on the issue of identity, at any point in time, whatever reality you choose to identify with, right? Vis-a-vis, do you have a positive outlook on life? Do you have a negative outlook on life? Is driven by this identity that you're assuming, of which the contributors are your experiences and the memory thereof, which also then leads to worry about the future, which leads you to a point of anxiety, which means essentially you are not in the moment. You are either in the past, right, regretting, or you're in the future and you're anxious. So what he says at the heart of this concept of karma, he calls it karma, the pronunciation. He says, what we do as human beings is we take ourselves too seriously. In the context of the universe and the size of, from eternity until now, we are just a speck on the existence of the world, right? I mean, in psychological circles, there's this concept of othering whenever you're going through problems, right? So one, looking at it from, another person's perspective, or secondly, looking at more grand problems, right? Like, okay, I've got a problem because I can't study for my test tomorrow. Wow, the world is going through a health pandemic with COVID. My problem in comparison is pretty small. What he is then articulating is, one, we take ourselves too seriously. And secondly, we are oblivious to the fact that where we came from, being the earth, is where we will return, right? The whole concept of karma states that we are one with the earth and the earth is one with us. We are one with the universe and the universe is one with us. So he starts talking about issues of limited identity. So if we consider this universal identity, where we are one with the earth and the earth is one with us, because from dust we have emerged and to dust we shall return, why is it that we continue to identify in certain groupings based on certain characteristics? So he then alludes on this concept of a limited identity. I'll make an example. Physical characteristics. I am of a brown skin color, right? Culture suggests or narrates that this is a black person. So I identify with other black people. So to that extent that I identify only with other people who are brown in color, I've already got a limited identity. Other iterations of limited identity then speak to nationality. religious inclination, right? Sexual orientation. Each element of identifying with a smaller subset of the world's population is a greater manifestation of limited identity. So, what quote speaks to, or do I, meditate on whenever I'm feeling paralyzed? I think it's the whole notion of the universal identity, right? If I'm feeling paralyzed, it's probably because I'm anxious about the future or I've got regrets about the past. Why? I'm a subject, or I'm a victim of my own memories and my own experiences, and as a result, I am either in regret of the past, or I'm living in the future. How then do I alleviate that? What is the remedy in that point? Perceive the moment for what it is. I share in my quote on meditation that I also subscribe to meditation, but not in the traditional sense of umming and ahhing and focusing on my breath and my breathing, etc. At certain points during the day, I enjoy solitude, right? On my reflection on being alone, I also make the distinction between being alone and solitude. They say the language has created the word alone to describe the misery of one being alone, and has described solitude, has created the word solitude to describe the bliss of one being alone. So, through this process of embracing being alone, being intentional about perceiving the moment for what it is, making sense of the past, what is it about my experiences and the memory thereof that is causing the spiritual agitation that is leading me to feeling paralyzed? What is it about the future that I'm anxious about? Because that would surely be greatly influenced by the fact that I think there is more that is in my control than actually is. So, 2 questions I ask if I'm feeling paralyzed. 1, what is it that I'm anxious about the future about? And of that topic, how much of it is really in my control? Honestly speaking. Making sense of the past, how has the memory of my experiences contributed to a sustained sense of regret, resentment, etc. Dealing with perceived paralysis really requires one, consider your own problems firstly in the greater scheme of things, and then secondly, really make sense of, from a forward-looking perspective, how much is actually in my control. From a backward-looking perspective, how much of that can I change? And what about my experience and memories have I been holding on to that is keeping me paralyzed? It's a continual conversation. It's a continual internal reflection, because like I mentioned, identity is fluid. Tomorrow I could wake up identifying as, someone feeling under the weather or not in a good mood. 30 minutes later, I could be ecstatic, right? So this problem or this concept of paralysis, again, perception, and how do we then reflect on and make sense of our perception of reality?
Thank you for that answer.
I think it was Portia's question very well. I definitely understood what you were saying. We have a few more minutes in our conversation with the author, section, because we are due to finish at 8, and we are mindful of time. It is a school night, so we just definitely want to keep to time. You've respected, as our guest, you've respected us and given us this time, so we just want to respect your time as well and finish at the time that we said we'll finish. So I have a few more questions, which are very short, I think. How did you celebrate when you finished the book, firstly? And how did you celebrate when it was actually published? Because those are different milestones. So did you celebrate differently when you were like, I think Umfundo also asked the question of, how did you know you were done with the book? So when you got to that point where you were done, how did you celebrate, if you celebrated? And also when your publishers and everyone got together and said, this is the final product? How did you celebrate that? Because this is something to be celebrated, and I hope you did do something. It may not be a big bash or party and anything like that, but in whatever way that celebration looks to you, what was that?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think following on from Portia's question and how one deals with perceived paralysis, you always have to keep yourself in check, right? As I mentioned with that quote from Socrates that nothing is stable in human affairs, so avoid undue elation and prosperity and undue depression in adversity. That means keep it here. Also, the concept of being devoid of both criticism and praise, right, can very easily put one in a very cynical perspective, right? Vis-a-vis, I finished the book, okay, cool, what's next, right? Let me not bask too much in the grace of the moment and perceive it for what it really is. Because, Anil, if you think about it, all of these suggestions and teachings about dealing with future anxiety as a remedy and resentment about the past by fully being present in the moment means, again, shouldn't be moved theoretically, shouldn't be moved by both praise and criticism, and perceive and accept life's happenings for what they really are. So I was happy how I celebrated. I mean, I'm an avid golf, a student of the game of golf, so I played some golf, but I think I really value quality time with my life partner, my girlfriend, and my kids. I think always aiming to be in the moment, one realizes how short life is, and that each moment that passes, we will never get back. So really cherishing each moment. So how I celebrated, I played some golf, but what I derived fulfillment from was sharing with my family, seeing their reactions, because really I'm doing this, yes, for myself, but I think this whole notion of doing it for the family, and by extension everybody who will be finding value in the book, is that, look, there's value that you derive from it, right? If we really are an experience of our memories and our experiences, then the experience of engaging with the contents of the book will surely change lives. So I was humbled. I was very somber. It was also like a point of internal reflection. So yeah, that's how I celebrated. And when it was actually published, I was relieved because when I set out to do this, I had an idea that it would take a bit of work. But when you actually get into it, it's actually very demanding. But I think it's more demanding of discipline. It's more demanding of, enjoying the process, right? Because if you don't fall in love with the process, the end goal will also not be fulfilling to you. One, because that is a goal mindset, right? The problem with the goal mindset is that it's finite. I'll give you an example. Why is it, and I'm speaking from my personal experience, why is it that, at the end of my 4-year degree at varsity, fine, I was happy, but, I didn't know what to do with myself. I had all this time, and I really didn't know what to do. So I think being more in love with outcomes is a finite and goal mindset. However, a growth mindset, which is what I've been leaning more towards, is falling in love with the process, right? I really love the person who I have become, the spiritual frequency that I've started to resonate at, that can, begin manifesting these, potential aspects of my being, of my potential, and bring them to life. I continue to be humbled, and I continue to be in awe and scared, because I respect the magnanimity of the task ahead. Yes, what we have achieved is great in comparison to where we were before. However, the journey is still going to be winding. So that's how I celebrated. How I celebrated the finishing of the final version was in line with my growth mindset. I didn't celebrate the goal. I celebrated the growth that I had achieved. That, wow, I'm now the kind of person who can finish a book. Now I'm the kind of person who can, host a launch and speak for an entire 2 hours, making sense, to people listening and hopefully deriving some meaning from the content that I'm sharing. 2 years ago, I would not in my wildest dreams have imagined that this would be real. And it speaks to, small wins, changing one's perspective to falling in love with the process, and really always being humble because, again, nothing is ever promised. Tomorrow is never promised, All we have at any point in time is this moment. So in this moment, if you've achieved that kind of growth that you're proud of, revel in that and take it for what it is, right? And take the next moment for what it is, making sure that you make the most of the opportunities that come with that. Always resonating at the kind of frequency that will bring to life different versions of your potential. I don't know what I'm going to achieve next year. What I do know is that the process that I've come to fall in love with is not going to stop. So yeah, it's just going to be interesting. I'm also surprised sometimes. Yeah.
Wow, thank you. Remain humble. Yeah. Thank you so much for that.
Sorry, Anela,
I think I'll ask.
we can't hear you properly.
And I think, my last question, if there isn't any other question from our guests, is what advice would you give to someone who has an interest sorry. Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
So my question that I have is, what advice would you give someone who what advice would you give someone who has an interest in writing a book, but they don't know how to start and where to start?
Sure, thanks for that.
But before you answer
and I
the
think-
question, enlightening and thought-provoking, which quote have you found most inspiring? So maybe you can answer my question and Tinashe's question at once, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So, advice to somebody who has ambitions to write a book. Firstly, I'm a fan of questioning, right? Do you want to write a book or do you want to get a message across, right? So, firstly, is a book the best way to get this across? People have podcasts, people write music, people write poetry, right? There's no use if I am not a talented singer, if I'm going to try and change the world or share a message through song. It's just not something that I can do. So one, what is in your realm of capabilities, right? And what formats can you then harness those capabilities into that you can use to share a message? Some of the world's most renowned musicians are seen as actually having changed the course of history, not through politics, but through the arts. A book, the written word, is just one form of channel that one can share their message. So one, take 2 steps back. What is in your realm of capabilities that you can do? And by well, I mean what comes naturally to you, what will not feel like work, because it is an entirely draining exercise. It requires a lot of effort. So again, one, what is in your realm of capability and what format can one best choose to articulate themselves through that? I guess that's the first thing you should do. If you do, after that screening process, still land on a book, then hang out with other authors. Get in touch with other people who've done it, right? You actually pick up a lot of small tricks, right? I mean, I came across a website called The Writer's Hour, where globally, it's like you go on the website, you register for like a Zoom session every day. I think it's for an hour or 2 a day, depending on your time zone in the world. You log on, people are on mute, just writing. It's authors who are there to just support each other, right? And be there for each other. So really hang out and start rubbing shoulders and exchanging energies with people who are authors themselves, right? And then, yeah, then I think that's the best way to do. You'll then, through that, find what works for you. There is no cookie cutter approach that one can use. Some people write better in the morning, others write better in the evening, right? Others write better, 3-hour sessions. Others write better in micro sessions, right? You will find what works for you. But again, in line with the growth mindset, focus more on, is this firstly in line with my capabilities, in line with those capabilities that do not feel like work, and as an extension, it's an energizing activity. You leave it feeling better than when you started. And then, Tinashe, can I just get your question again? Sorry, sometimes when we are articulating too much. What quote have I found most inspiring? Yeah, look, man, it's the Michelangelo quote. The one that says, he saw an angel in the marble and carved until he set him free. I mean, if you Google the picture, it's an image of a block of marble with a semi-sculpted, really well-defined physique, with the lower half still being the block of marble, with this person still busy chiseling away. So what that means is, in your marble is all of the potential that you have, right? Every time you chip away at speaking yourself out of, manifesting your potential, every time you talk yourself into activities and actions that, one, are in line with your capabilities, two, do not feel like work, and three, are what the world needs, you are literally carving away at this marble to bring to life the angel that is within. So the quote that really continues to inspire me, I mean, there are many to choose from, but this one was and continues to remain profound, right? Finding the angel in the marble and carving until you set him free. And again, in line with the concept of the growth mindset, it is an ongoing process, right? Do not be driven by goals, because that's finite. Through that process of carving, the person that you become, the growth mindset and the growth that you achieve, that is what will ensure a sustained and sustainable, success and fulfillment.
But for answering those questions for us, and wrap up the conversation with our author. And we've got about 8 minutes, 7 minutes to cover. Please, can you just give us your closing remarks before we officially end this digital launch? And as you close, please can you just let our guests know where they can purchase the book, and everything related to how they can get hold of the book.
Thank you for that, Anele. So, to the very many people who took the time to, engage with us in this session, I'm truly thankful, because it said that, the true cost of anything is how much life you give up for it. So to those of you who have given up 2 hours of your life, that is the true cost that you have had to pay for joining this session. Secondly, look, I'm really always in awe of what is potential, what the potential of the human mind can unleash with just a change of perspective. That's why I wrote this book, and that's why I will continue to have discussions of that nature, where we really probe perspective, right? Because again, as Henry Ford mentioned, whether you believe you can or you can't, you're right either way. I'm hoping that this book will be just one of many tools that you will use to constantly remind yourself that perspective, very often drives reality, and that you, through controlling and focusing only on the things that you can control, can change the future. Cool. Thirdly, where people can find the book. So I've already shared a link on my social media platforms. So that is on my Instagram profile, my Twitter profile. I'm going to be sharing it on my Facebook profile. We'll be sharing it in the comments here as well. But essentially, we're also going to be sharing clips that we're going to package of this production on the socials in the next couple of days and weeks. But this is the 21st century. We don't need each other's numbers anymore. Reach out to me directly if you are not able to find that link on my social media profiles. Let's engage, and let me give you the link and let's share that. So I think essentially it's available now. We can purchase it. And the formats, just to recap, is the ebook and audiobook. So we've got 3 offerings. You can buy the audiobook on its own, which is broken down. It's 7 audio files, 1 for each of the sections of the book. So you can consume that at your leisure. We've also got an ebook, which is in PDF and EPUB version formats. The EPUB is basically on each of your phones. You should have like an ebook reader. So once you download the EPUB file, it shows up as a book properly formatted on your file. And we've also got a bundle that's available, so you can buy both. Pricing wise, audiobook is $149.90. Ebook on its own is also $149.90, but the bundle is only $249.90. Again, there is no cost to investing in your own well-being. So in line with, we need to survive and, capture some value in this world, I'm hoping that we're both able to derive value from it. So it's available. Go to my social media profiles. The link should be there. If not, leave us a comment. We'll definitely get back to you with the link. And we hope this is not the end of it. I mean, Anele, we had an idea to almost start a series of conversations, right? It can be on Twitter, or we can continue the streaming thing, where I think in the format of a monthly interactive discussion, we can just put a topic on the table and just see where it takes us. One of the ideas that I had with Anelo was for the festive season that we are approaching, the question we could ask is the festive season really festive? That could be a topic of discussion for next month. From what perspective? For people who have difficult relationships with their families, for people without families, for people who have strained identities when it comes to the issue of family. That is actually the most terrible time of the year for them. For some people, the issues of black tax come into play. We're going home, it's not about, people reflecting on how much they miss you, but what it is you can bring, and you're basically being taxed. So again, the aim is to start a series of conversations, right? Let us engage. Let us unpack what is really, influencing our spiritual resonances negatively, and hopefully through that process, we'll be able to get to points of clarity. But I have to remind everybody, please don't quote me on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I think we're experiencing some technical difficulties with Anele. So while she's making her way back online, again, I'd like to extend my many thanks to everyone who joined. Anele, I would also like to honor you and really thank you for the time you've taken to prepare for this broadcast, the time you've taken to prepare questions. You facilitated a really engaging discussion, and I'd really just like to also put you on the spotlight and say thank you. You have also been doing some fantastic work in the fight for people's awareness around mental health issues. I mean, I'm just going to market some of what you do. Anele hosts monthly Tea with Anele sessions where she chooses a location and people can buy tickets and come, really having conversations, frank conversations around pertinent issues that are related to mental health and well-being, and really building a community of people who are not only conscious of their own well-being but are taking active steps to make sure that they share the lights that they continue to shine as well. So Anele, thank you for that. We have just about a minute left. Thank you so much, everyone. Let us engage on the socials. Once again, we're going to package this content and share it on our social media profile. So this is not the end. Again, I'll leave you with my favorite quote by Socrates. Remember that nothing is stable in human affairs. So avoid undue elation in prosperity and undue depression in adversity. But don't quote me on that. Peace, everyone. Good night.